Welcome to the League of Women Voters Lexington Community Forum, Women in Action. I'm glad you could be with us. I'm Mary Hughes, co-president of the Lexington League, along with Jennifer Jackson. We have an exciting program for you this evening. We have two extraordinary women with us tonight as our forum speakers. Dot Ridings, former president of the League of Women Voters of the United States and League of Women Voters of Kentucky, and Marsha Weinstein, president of the National Collaborative for Women's History Sites. Dot Ridings is a former newspaper reporter, editor, and publisher, and served the League of Women Voters of the United States as president from 1982 to 1986, and as a member of its board of directors from 1976 to 1986. She has worked in many civic organizations and presently serves as a co-chair of the Commission on the 2020 presidential debates. Marsha Weinstein is a civic activist with a passion for women's history and girl leadership development. In addition to her present position as president of the National Collaborative of Women's History Sites, Ms. Weinstein is founder and past president of the Elizabeth Cady Stanton Trust and the founder and past president of the Patty and Mildred Hill Happy Birthday Park. She is the former executive director of the Kentucky Commission on Women, where she convinced 3 Kentucky governors to grant clemency and pardons to more than 24 women who were imprisoned for killing or conspiring to kill their abusers. As with Dot Ridings, Marsha Weinstein's national, state, and local civic activities are too numerous to mention tonight. We'll begin with Dot Ridings, who will talk to us about issues which were paramount during her tenures with the League. We will have questions and comments following Ms. Ryder's presentation. If you do have a question or a comment, if you would please submit those questions through our chat box, and we'll be watching that. Thanks. Dot?
And thank you so much.
That
was a good introduction, and I'm delighted to be with the Lexington League tonight. It kind of underscores what I even told a national reviewer today who was asking about the League and its work on issues, which is, while it was wonderful to serve as national president of the League of Women Voters of the United States, it was the most satisfying to me, frankly, to be a local league president and very active before that, even in the local league, because that's where the emphasis on action really takes place, is on the local, state levels. I mean, it really does. The national level is important. I don't want to downplay it, but I think for most of us, what's going on in our communities, our home bases, is what really matters. So I'm looking forward to your questions, but I do want to give you a brief introduction because I understand that most of the viewers of this might be brand new to the League, although you may have known about us, maybe you have not been active in us, and I want to encourage you to become active. And particularly as a Kentuckian, I would hope you would do that with all the dispatch that the Lexington and Kentucky leagues would urge you to do. But again, let me tell you a little bit about my history, because then I think that will maybe jog a few memories, or at least maybe encourage some of you to do somewhat the same kind of path. I grew up in West Virginia. My mother was not a League member. This was a long time ago. And before I even go any further, things I say maybe due to memory. I am 81 now. I just celebrated my 81st birthday last week. So I am of the older generation. I still have some memory left, but it needs jogging a lot. But I will try to do my best in being truthful as I can be. What I do remember is very well is how I first ran into the League. I had just graduated from journalism school and moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, to be a reporter for the Charlotte Observer. Now, my interest was in politics. It just had been. It was from a family history out of West Virginia. But I took a job, anything I could get at that time, just out of college. And they didn't really know much about the league at all. I worked for, at that time, I remember my age, for a section of the newspaper called For and About Women.
Oh.
Now, I wanted to be on the legislative staff, but that wasn't very open to women. So one of my first charges was to make it part of what the Charlotte Observer was all about. And so I wrote about women. The very first woman who ever served in the Kentucky legislature, the North Carolina legislature, which had been long ago, and she was the only one, that kind of thing. And what local women were doing to make things happen in their communities. It was a great opportunity to do that. I was officially called the fashion editor. I had never cared about fashion at all, but I was hired as a general assignment reporter. But when I got there, their fashion editor had just gone to Miami, so I was it. You're a woman, you just came in, and you're the fashion editor. So I pursued attractive wearable women and women in politics and blah, 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 blah. Well, anyway, I don't want to belabor that too much, but I didn't know about the League of Women Voters. I really didn't know much until I did become a legislative reporter and went to Raleigh, which was in the capital of North Carolina, where the legislature met. And I realized as a reporter, my best sources of information, good information, not just biased information, was from the League of Women Voters. They would tell me the yeses and the nos. And then if I asked, they'd tell me what they thought. But they would tell me both sides of the story. And there usually are at least two sides of the story. And I got to admire them a lot. Now, in those days, I don't know what it's like now, but in those days, reporters did not join associations or clubs or anything like that. So I had nothing to do with belonging to the league. Meanwhile, I'd met my husband, who was also a reporter at the Charlotte Observer, and come there from Missouri Journalism School. And we met, we married, and in 1968, we moved to Louisville. The reason was, of course, a job for him because I was pregnant with our first child. But I remember it so well. I also remember my biggest memory from Charlotte is when my grandfather died and I inherited some property from him along with other grandchildren. And I was told by West Virginia officials that, oh, okay, as soon as your husband gives permission, you may inherit. Well, that was, I'm talking early 60s. So, that was a long time ago, but it was a real eye-opener to me, a real eye-opener. Meanwhile, my husband and I, who had married, and he got a great job in Louisville at the Courier-Journal, and we moved there when I was very, very pregnant. And there I was, 6 or 7 months pregnant, new house, new community I'd never known anything about. And that's when I called the League of Women Voters office because of what I had run into in Raleigh, which was these were women who knew what they were talking about and they would tell me the truth. And, it was either yes or no, or here's what we think, but, we've studied this, or maybe we haven't, but here's the pros and the cons. So I called the league in Louisville, said, I don't need a membership coffee. I just send me the information and I'll send you the dues and send me the newsletter. Very soon I got my dues. I think it was $10. Sorry, Lexington. It was about $10 in 1960. And the newsletter, and the first newsletter said, I thought, I have a baby, I need something to keep my mind going. So the league's studies kind of interested me. But I got that newsletter, and one of the touching parts of it were, oh, so-and-so has just moved to the Midwest, and she's leaving town, and she's been editing our bulletin for a long time. And isn't there anybody out there who wants to edit the bulletin? Well, I looked at that. I'm a journalism graduate, master's degree even in level in journalism. I'd worked as a newspaper reporter for 6 years already, or 7 years. So I called them up and said, look, I can do that. And the immediate thing was, great, you're on the board. Okay, now this is a warning to those of you who are brand new league members. If you volunteer your efforts, you may be told, good, you're on the board. Well,
we try to keep that under wraps.
So actually it was a good thing to happen to me, because it taught me about my community. That was the big thing. I didn't know my community, and I had a child just born who's going to go to school. I needed all the information I could get, and I needed an understanding organization about women with children. And that was the league for me. I mean, I'm just really, really delighted to report that it was a good marriage, not only my own personal marriage, but a marriage between me and the League of Women Voters. And that was the first organization I joined, because, as I repeat, reporters at that time did not belong to organizations, because it would apparently give people an idea that, well, we can just call on them. I don't know why. I don't know why. It was too long ago. I've forgotten that, blaming that to my memory. Anyway, so I went on the board. I mean, it was 1968. Maybe it was 69 by then, because the child was born in late 68. The first son, who's now, by the way, a lawyer in Washington, D.C., and is very, very sympathetic to all. He's in line with league interests and policies. He's lived through that. I have another child who is younger than that, and came up 4 years behind, later than that, who's still around and doing great things as a special needs person. So I started working at the league, doing the newsletter and what all board members do, which is, be involved in everything that's going on. And we had some really interesting times. Now, this was 68 or early 69 when I joined. By 72, I was president of the local league. That also tells you something too. Maybe it was the times then, but there were not that many who were really gung-ho or had as much time to devote. And I had been seriously employed before then, and just frankly had time on my hands. And the league let me I have pictures of me with my firstborn on my back, in league meetings, board meetings, and so forth. So anyway, it was another time. But I was on that board and became president then in 1972. And I served as local league president for 4 years, 2 terms. I don't know how you all do it now, but I think it's 2 years terms. And it was a great experience. I've been asked many times to talk about my time in the league, both locally and nationally. I really was never on the state board, although I think that was part of the introduction, but that's okay. That's okay.
All right.
That's all right. State board had their offices in the offices of the Louisville League, and I think still do. So, we were very close, but I was not on the officially a board member or an activist other than a member. Because that's the thing, by the way, in case some of you don't know, when you join the league, you join the league locally, statewide, nationally. I mean, you are a league member all the way through the levels of government influence that we try to have. So during the time, my 4 years as presidency happened to occur during a major issue in Louisville, which underscores my belief that local issues are where we can have the most influence. That was busing for desegregation. In 1975, we actually passed and approved, against much opposition from folks, And it wasn't all racial, but a lot of it was, because we had two separate school boards. We had a city school board and a county school board. And the city schools were really predominantly Black. The county schools, which is outside the county outside of Louisville, was predominantly white. So it was a location discrimination as well as one that hit you through the school system. But we were really talking about the schools, because the league has always, to my knowledge, always been interested in school issues, in freedom, in equity, and all those important and excellence in education. So those years were really big for us in Louisville in terms of school desegregation. As a result of it, because we really were pretty upfront about all this, and we used our influence everywhere we could, and I can answer questions if I can remember that far back. But that's what kind of the National League saw as a growing issue nationwide, not just in Louisville. But I mean, so I did some things for the local league, for the National League, speaking on various platforms and so forth, and actually was then appointed to the national board, which you can do as a first timer. Be appointed. You don't have to be elected. At least that's, maybe Marsha can tell us if it's changed. I'm just talking about the old days. But I was appointed to the national board in 1976 when I went out of office as the local league president. So I skipped the state level. I'm kind of sorry I did, but it's what happened, because education, and particularly desegregation of education, was such a big issue nationwide. So I did join the national board in 1976. We'd already had many appeals for help from a lot of places that are, many of which are still having desegregation problems, as we are here in Louisville. But that was the issue. How do you address this issue, which the league cares so much about, in a way? So that's why I went to the national board, and I was appointed to be the education chair. And I went out and spoke a lot. And in the intermedium, by the way, those of you in Lexington will be interested to know, we founded the Pritchard Committee. And it was actually, the Pritchard Committee was formed and officially formed in Louisville, in a meeting that I set up with Ed Pritchard, and I was his co-chair from the very beginnings of the Pritchard Committee, which Cindy Heine can tell you a lot more about than I can. But those were the days when education was at the top of the agenda for an awful lot of folks and a lot of organizations, and the league was right at the top with all the rest. Busing was a big issue, but so were the education issues about equity and so forth. All those things. We also, during my local league issues, just to mention a few that were important in addition, although I always put education at the top, the merger of city and county to get rid of that racial discrimination we had, that just happened because of where we were located. But as you know now, Louisville is a Louisville Metro. We used to be Louisville and Jefferson County, two separate entities. And now we're Metro Louisville. We also had a lot of conservation issues. So back in the day when we were trying to worry about a lot of things that we're still worrying about right now in terms of conservation. And women's rights was right at the top too. I always put education first, but women's rights came right behind it, because at that time, I still remembered when my grandfather died and I couldn't inherit anything unless my husband said it was okay for me to inherit. But women's rights in terms of equity and non-discrimination was high on the agenda. Now, during my national, I'm going to make about 2 more minutes and I'm going to quit and ask for questions if there are any. But during my national presidency, I travel a whole lot. In fact, I've just checked in on it within the last week, because there's an interviewer who's doing a documentary, as a matter of fact. Interesting. And I started talking about it the other day, and I couldn't remember it. I had to go back and look and see why I had traveled to, goodness, for various organizations during my national presidency, to Taiwan, to Israel and Egypt, to Turkey, where I'll never forget the Turkey one, because I sat in on whatever the name of the person, he's not president, prime minister, whatever it is, invited me to sit in on a cabinet meeting, and then gave a party afterwards with his wife as my co-host, and she didn't speak any English, I didn't speak any Turkish, so we nodded and smiled. To the Philippines, to Brazil, where I addressed the legislature in Brazil, to Paraguay, Uruguay, Chile, Argentina, and many of those were from State Department requests, U.S. State Department requests, that I go and talk about the emphasis on women in elective office, to Japan, to Africa, to China. I was on the Ford Foundation for a number of years, and some of those trips were initiated by Ford. But it was a lot of travel, and because of the League of Women Voters connection, which made me, okay to talk about all those issues and to be fair and honest. And again, back to my origins in the League, to tell the pros and the cons. And now we're in national debates. I was on the national board of the League when we were the sponsor of presidential debates beginning in 1976. It's now under the aegis of the Commission on Presidential Debates, and we can talk about that, and I can tell you why and all that kind of stuff. But I'm the co-chair of the Commission on National Debates, presidential debates now. And now, as I say, I'm 81, sitting in my kitchen in Louisville, Kentucky, as a retired person from the newspaper business, also from the Council on Foundations, where I was CEO for 10 years, right before I retired. And that is my wish. And the biggest wish I have is that you can enjoy and be educated by and as articulate about the League as I would hope. So thanks for the invitation.
Thank you, Dot, so much. I think we do have some questions. That was just wonderful. I had no idea you did all of those things. I have a personal question, Dot. You were talking about the documentary.
Yes.
Exactly what is the documentary about, you, or is it about?
Well, it's about me and the League, and I can't tell you much about it because I really can't tell you much about it. I'm still in the process of talking to the people. They interviewed me earlier, about 2 years ago, and now I'm back to talking about what's happened since then. And it's Guggenheim Productions, I think. If you go, maybe GPI, but that's all I can tell you. But it's not done, not by any means.
Good. That's exciting. You'll have to tell us when it's going to be shown.
We'll do that.
Good. I know that Cindy asked about if you could talk a little bit more about the League of Women Voters US and the presidential debates, and maybe then some view into the commission or how that all happened.
Okay. And I don't want to take, obviously I could talk about this for 5 hours, but I won't do that. Most of you probably know that in relatively modern times, the first presidential debates were in 1960. That was the year that we really first enjoyed having presidential debates. Then there weren't any for 16 years because either the candidates didn't agree, or there were legal regulations that really stopped that, because in 1960 they actually had to pass a temporary lifting of the restrictions of the Federal Elections Commission to allow, or Federal Communications Commission, which required that any media showing a debate like that had to provide equal opportunity. Sounds good, but we have 200 or 300 people who who actually file to run for president of the United States. You couldn't have an election or you wouldn't, nobody would carry an event that had 200 or 300 people in it. And so it died in 1976, under the wise leadership of Newt Minow, who wrote, by the way, if you're really interested in debates, his book is just wonderful. Inside the Presidential Debates is the title. It's a little old now, but it's really, really good. And he's still on the commission on presidential debates. He's been a debates maven for a long time. But he was the chair of the Federal Communications Commission, and they lifted that jurisdiction in 1976 on the grounds that that a debate had to be sponsored by a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that had no connection with the television industry. And it was written for, I have to tell you, it was written for the presidential debates. I know that. I mean, I know that for the people who were there involved, because they figure we could do it and be considered good purveyors of information that was not skewed one way or the other. So that's how debates really began in 76. And the league stepped in and did it. I joined the board in the summer of 76. So I don't even, I wasn't around when all the plans were made and all the deals were cut or whatever. So I can't tell you much about that, which a lot of people are sorry about, but I just can't. Now, in 1980, I was first vice president of the league and communications chair. And I was very involved. And in 1984, I was the president, national president. So there, I was certainly clearly involved. Now, right after I left office, after serving 2 terms as the league president, national league president, I returned to the journalism profession to become a publisher with Knight Ridder. And I'm sure those of you in Lexington who are old enough will remember that time when Knight Ridder was still alive and well. And so I was not around for what happened after that. But my understanding is the league did the right thing, because the commission, as it was initially structured, was very bipartisan. It was the head of the Democrats and the head of the Republicans, and they set the rules and so forth. I would have had nothing to do with it. My successor as president, Nancy Newman, had nothing to do with it. She called it the hoodwinking of the American public, so forth. Anyway, I wasn't around, so I can't really tell you all that went on. But I know that was the situation after I left in the following elections, which were in 1988. Is that right? I hope I'm right on it. No, not 86. That was 86. I was off in Florida. No, I was in Charlotte, North Carolina, learning how to be a publisher with Knight Ridder. Then they shipped me off to Florida for 10 years as a newspaper publisher in Florida. But after I got back and retired, I was asked by the Commission on Presidential Debates to join their force. They wanted the background, they wanted the history and the knowledge that the league had provided to this. And I did a lot of soul searching and learned that they had totally changed from a bipartisan organization to a nonpartisan organization. I said, okay, that was my sticking point. So I'm glad to join you. And now I've been with them ever since, and now I co-chair.
Great. That's wonderful, Dot. I know that Cindy Heine also wondered about the ERA. Was the league very...
Oh, didn't even mention it, did I? It was a biggie. It was a biggie. And Nancy Newman, who was my successor as national president, was our ERA chair. We went through hill and high water on ERA, and it was a lot heavier than it is now. But it's still, it's still around with us. We still have it. But it was big time. And Nancy did a lot. She was my ERA chair when I was president. And she did a lot of debates with Phyllis Schlafly, and we did a lot of work on the ERA, a lot, and still are very supportive. Times have changed. We were around when, we were here as the league when the last state provided the necessary vote for the voting privilege for women passed. And we were hoping that would happen. And I mean, that's really a long ago. Tennessee was our champion because they were the last state to ratify the amendment that gave women the right to vote. And we kept hoping that we would have something like that happen with ERA. So far, we're still talking about it. Times have changed, but still talking about it.
For sure.
And just to, I just want to jump in for people who may not be familiar, that the ERA is the Equal Rights Amendment.
Oh yeah, sorry. Thank you. Thank you. You know, you do, aside from memory, you tend to shorthand and abbreviate things. So I apologize for that.
Right. Are there some more questions for Dot? I mean, we could talk all night, but I know we want to hear something from Marsha too, but there may be other questions for you, Dot. Anybody? Dot, we thank you so much. I would love to talk to you all night, but we're also anxious to hear what Marsha has to say.
Absolutely. And thank you all so
Thank
much
you.
for what you do in Lexington. I've known about that ever since we moved to Louisville in '68, and I ran into, and then when I became very active in the Pritchard Committee, I lived almost all the time as Ed Pritchard's vice chair. I felt like I was living in Lexington half the time. So.
There was just a comment, Dot. Cindy Heine said, I'd recommend the Hulu movie, Mrs. America, for the story of the ERA.
Yep, good.
That sounds great. All right. Well, thank you again, Dot. We appreciate your being here with us.
Thank you.
All right. Let's hear from Marsha Weinstein, who's going to talk to us about some Kentucky suffragists. Marsha?
Okay, well, I just want to follow up about the Equal Rights Amendment.
Okay. Please.
The latest thing that's happened with the Equal Rights Amendment is the 38th state has ratified it, Virginia, about a year ago.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And now there is confusion about the Equal Rights Amendment. It seems like that the Attorney General Bill Barr is trying to say that it will not go forward. However, there's only one step left. And that is the United States Archivist has got to publish the Equal Rights Amendment, and then it will become law. So there is some backroom maneuver. Forget the Attorney General and what he thinks.
Mm-hmm.
One person, one man can sign the Archivist, and it will become law.
Wow.
So we're closer than we realize. I mean, a lot of people think because the Attorney General is trying to say it can't be. So I mean, I'm hopeful that within 12 months, potentially, the Equal Rights Amendment will become law. So we'll see. I just wanted to talk about that before. And thank you, Don. I just love hearing your history. I didn't know all that. My goodness. And what's so interesting is I moved to Kentucky 10 years after you in 1979. And I became, even though I grew up Southern Baptist in Alabama, I married a Jewish man. And we moved to Louisville because of my husband, you know, followed him. And I became very involved with the National Council of Jewish Women as a young mother with small children. And the National Council of Jewish Women was really my launching pad. It was similar to the League and did some things with them on how to lobby, study legislation, advocate for causes which were similar to the League's, you know, child advocacy, health, daycare, education. So that's how I got my start. And I'm always be grateful for the mentors of the women that taught me the ropes. But just kind of to fast forward, I was very fortunate that Governor Brereton Jones in the early 90s, when he became governor, he appointed me to be the executive director of the Kentucky Commission on Women. And that was a plum job because I worked for the governor out of basically the governor's office. And the thing that was just so amazing is that he let me attend all the cabinet meetings.
Mm-hmm.
And so I gave me access to all, you know, the cabinet secretaries. And he was very supportive of the office and kind of let me just do whatever I wanted to do. So that experience in government really helped me. And the thing that was so exciting about my time there was in 1995, it was the 75th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment. So my staff and I decided to have a big exhibit at the Kentucky State Fair to celebrate the 75th anniversary. And my attitude, even though I had minored in college in history, my attitude was, I cannot worry about yesterday. I got to think about today and tomorrow. Well, when we had this anniversary celebration at the state fair and we were putting an exhibit together, I learned all this history, and I found out they were giving these women who were fighting for the right to vote the same arguments as they were giving us women to, 1995 of why women can't do this or that. And I was just like outraged. I went, oh my gosh, this is nothing new. Why don't I know who these wonderful women were? Elizabeth Cady Stanton and all these arguments and stuff the women had to put up with. And so then and there, I committed my life to telling everybody that would listen to me about the history of the suffrage movement and why it was so important that you know this history. Because the number one thing you need to know it, inspiration. When it is so inspiring when you learn how hard they fought for us to give the right to vote. Ever since 1995, every time I go to the polls, I am grateful that I have the right to vote, because I know that women not always had this right to vote. And to today, still a lot of people don't have the right to vote. So I was really passionate. So that was 1995. Well, 3 years later was the 150th anniversary of the first Women's Rights Convention that was held in Seneca Falls, New York, where Elizabeth Cady Stanton and a group of women wrote the Declaration of Sentiments that said, all women and men are created equal. She took this document based on the Declaration of Independence, and also that women should have the right to an education. They should be able to own property, because back then when you got married, you legally became one, and the one was your husband, which meant you couldn't own any property. If your salary, your wages were payable to your husband, you had no control of your money. You had no control over your children. You had no control over your body. I mean, you were forced to have sex with your husband whether you wanted to or not, because he owned you literally. And when I learned this, I was just like, oh my gosh, this is just unbelievable. So here we are 3 years later at Seneca Falls. And of course, this was like, I call it the Super Bowl of the suffrage movement or women's rights being at Seneca Falls. Well, Hillary Clinton was the first lady then. And she gave a speech about suffrage. And she also talked about this book called 33 Things Every Girl Should Know. And one chapter was written by the descendant of Elizabeth Cady Stanton, her great-great-great-granddaughter, young Elizabeth, who's 14 years old. And so my two passions are the history of the suffrage movement and girl leadership development. So I was also having a girls' leadership conference in Louisville. And when I heard Hillary Clinton talk about this descendant, young Elizabeth, I thought, oh, well, we need to bring her to Louisville to speak to our girls about her famous ancestor. How cool would that be? So young Elizabeth, that comes, and a couple of months later, this is July, we're in Seneca Falls. In November, she's at the Young Elizabeth's at the Girls Leadership Conference that's held at the Jewish Community Center in Louisville. And along with young Elizabeth comes her mother, Colleen, who's my age. Well, long story short, I, a few months later, go to visit. They live in Greenwich, Connecticut. I get to go to Greenwich, and I go to their house. Oh my gosh, I died and went to heaven. They have Elizabeth's clothes. They have family scrapbooks of Susan Anthony and all these favorite suffrage leaders. They have furniture. I went, oh my goodness, is this fabulous or what? I have really died and gone to heaven. So that was the 1st of December. So long story short, Colleen and I, because of this, a long story, but we formed the Elizabeth Cady Stanton Trust, and we saved this national suffrage collection of 3,000 items. And so then what Colleen and I started doing is traveling around the country trying to find what to do with this suffrage collection. And Colleen can get into places I couldn't get into because, she was the descendant. So we met a lot of people, but the bottom line was nobody cared about it. I mean, we visited museums, we visited universities, and so why should we care about the history of the suffrage movement? Really? I was just like, oh my gosh, this is just unbelievable that no one cares. So in the meantime, I get involved with this organization called the National Collaborative for Women's History Sites that interprets, most people learn their history, not from reading books, but visiting historic sites like museums, historic homes, battlefields. This is where people learn their history. And unfortunately, when you visit these historic sites, they tell you the great white man story. They don't tell you what the women were doing at these sites. They don't tell you what people of color are doing at these sites. And so this organization's goal is to interpret these sites to tell the whole story. So fast forward, for the anniversary of the 100th anniversary of this, we decided that we would create a National Votes for Women's Trail. And we would document across America where the suffrage movement took place. Well, the thing about it is, I mean, we know, you know, our presidents and the generals and all those people, but we know Susan B. Anthony and some of those people, but we don't know the stories of hundreds and thousands of women and men across America that fought for women to have the right to vote in local communities. And that is so powerful because that is relevant today. You're talking about inspiration. That's how social change and social justice takes place, is a grassroots level organizing, just like the League does, just what Dot was talking about, how important the work of the League is. That's how change takes place. So can you show the video right now?
Yeah,
So
I think
anyway,
I
what
can.
happened, because I was the president, Kentucky was the first state, to get these Pomeroy markers that were marked on the trail. Now there's a foundation in New York called the Pomeroy Foundation. When they learned about our National Votes for Women's Trail, they offered to give us 250 roadside suffrage markers to put up across the country, and each state would get 5 markers. So Kentucky got the first 5 markers. And the thing about these markers that's so exciting, it's people really love learning about community history. I never thought about the word community history before, but and they don't know their history. And when they learn their local history, they get so excited and take pride in it. And that even motivates them more to also contribute to their community history. So if you want to show, this is going to be a video produced by KET on the Kentucky Votes for Women's Trail.
It's been just 100 years since American women won the right to vote. Suffragists fought
Can everybody hear that?
decades to achieve those equal rights in the voting booth. Several women from Kentucky were leading the suffrage movement, and markers along a new national trail will tell their stories.
What we are learning is the story of how thousands of women and men across America worked on the suffrage movement, and it's never been documented. You cannot find this history anywhere. We have created a National Votes for Women's Trail, and the purpose of this trail is to document the suffrage sites across America where the suffrage movement took place, and we put it in a database on our computer so anyone can go access it. And it is so exciting. We have over 1,000 suffrage sites on our database, and our goal is to have over 2,020 by 2020. The National Votes for Women's Trail is having a much larger impact than I ever dreamed possible. Because I was the president of the organization, it's kind of like a pilot project. Kentucky's been the first state to get the Pomeroy markers. We got the first one for Susan Look Avery, who was the founder of the Louisville Suffrage Association and also the founder of the Women's Club of Louisville. We had the second one for Dr. Mary Britton, who's an African-American physician from Lexington, the only woman physician in Lexington. And she spoke in Danville at the St. James African American Episcopal Church in 1887 to the Kentucky Colored Teachers Association on why women should have the right to vote. And she was also really good friends with Ida B. Wells. Well, this church, which was built in 1884, was thrilled to know this history because they didn't know anything about Dr. Mary Britton there. And they just really appreciated that people cared. I mean, they treated me like I was giving them $1 million. I'm telling you, they're that happy that this contributions of this woman at their side, their church, was being recognized and people cared about it.
I guess I was so excited. I told my wife, I can't, wait to let the people know at church what's going on about this history. Just to know that this young lady, Black African-American, came and spoke on behalf of women's suffrage in that time era. It really blew my mind.
Mhm.
Because back then, you know, a woman, especially a woman of color, is supposed to be quiet. But Sheba Pearson spoke.
Then we put one up in Richmond, Kentucky at Whitehall for Mary Barclay. Mary Barclay was the oldest daughter of Cassius Clay, and she was brilliant. In 1884, she testified before the U.S. House Judiciary Committee on why women should have the right to vote. I think she was the first woman ever to be allowed to testify before Congress. And she was also president of some of the National Suffrage Associations. She brought Susan B. Anthony to Kentucky and other great leaders. So Kentucky was really a strong suffrage state for, you know, considering the South. And then we had this one for Josephine Henry, and then the next one's going to be for Madeline Breckinridge, who is from Lexington.
I feel a tremendous energy here in Kentucky. You've taken a lead in putting these roadside markers up. You're honoring a woman that, although she was a local figure, she also served as a national figure. And so it's an honor for me to come here and celebrate Josephine Henry, but also the fact that she was involved with the women's suffrage movement. She was involved with Kentucky's Marital Women and Property Act, and she was involved with the Women's Bible. So although she lived in this house right here, it's amazing. I get goosebumps to think that how she connected with my great-great-grandmother, who is Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Spirit that will help the cause along. Sing it as we ought to sing it cheerily and strong. Giving the balance to the lady.
So to be in the power of a sight, being in the front yard of Josephine Henry's home and feeling her presence and the threshold of her walking in out the door, it's a very spiritual experience that she was a real person living in rural Kentucky and making a national impact. We have state coordinators in every state, and their job is to learn and document their history, and that's how it is working. So all the state coordinators are part of our national network of learning this history. The impact we're having on doing this research is adding to the body of knowledge of American history that's never been done before. You know, we know who, you know, Washington, the presidents and the great generals, but we don't know about this contribution that really added 50% of the population to be full citizens. That is huge. And it's relevant today. It's like, oh, who cares what happened, you know, a long time ago. Well, this is really huge in the whole issue of current voting rights. The right to vote is the right which you gain all other rights, or you lose all other rights. Well, my hope is that when people learn this history, that they'll be inspired to be actively engaged in their communities at whatever level that they, you know, feel comfortable with, and that they will want to learn more, motivated to learn more, and make them, you know, really value voting rights and the importance and understand why it's up to everyone to be engaged. You just can't depend on other people to take care of you. It's your responsibility.
Equal rights, our motto is we're loyal to the end, giving the balance to the lady.
The suffrage women, they had a really good time. This was not like, oh no, we have to write another book. They had fun. And so we're having fun. We're having a good time. You know, let the good times roll. How can we stir it up? What else can we stir up?
Okay, you can turn it off. So you can see the Pomeroy roadside markers, what a great impact it's having. And what's so fun, and so I've been working with some of the League of Women Voters. The League of Women Voters in Montana is helping put their roadside markers up, and other places around the country. They're helping, and they're learning this history. And it's just, it's the most fun of anything I've ever done. And also, I'm really grateful. We have this advisory committee of scholars, the leading national suffrage scholars that are documenting all this stuff. And these women are so excited to be learning this history and knowing, really, truly adding to the body of knowledge is incredible of this history of America, of the unknown stories that have never been told. So I really am so grateful to be part of such an exciting endeavor, especially in these times when voting is at the, and they're saying more people will probably vote in this upcoming presidential election than the history of the nation. So I think this is all very timely. But anyway, you can say I can go on forever. But what questions do you have?
Marsha, well, you've already talked about several prominent suffragists. Do you have a favorite among them, or have you already talked about your favorite suffragist?
Well, I like a lot of them. I think I feel closest to Josephine Henry, because what happened at the end, and why I didn't, and most people don't know who Elizabeth Cady Stanton was, because she got so upset at the end of her life that men kept saying women can't do this and that because of what the Bible says. So she pulled together a group of Greek and Hebrew scholars to go back to original text to see what the Bible really said. And then she wrote the Woman's Bible, which was an interpretation of what it really said. And Josephine Henry was on her Women's Bible Revision Committee. She was very close with Elizabeth Cady Stanton. And she's like a Kentucky woman from rural Kentucky. And so I really am impressed with that. And of course, what was so bad about writing the Bible is all the women in the suffrage movement were furious and they threw her out. Elizabeth, who started the suffrage movement, and so there was an intentional effort to squelch her memory from the American public. And that's what nobody knew who she was, because what she did was so radical. And even nowadays, talking about the Woman's Bible is very controversial. But at the University of Kentucky, there's a professor, Dr. Kathy Kern, who wrote the book, Mrs. Stanton's Bible, which is an analysis of that. And it's even taught at Harvard's Divinity School. But still, no one wanted to know who Elizabeth was and what she did. So I really like Josephine Henry. And of course, everyone threw Josephine Henry out of, she was ostracized too, even though she got Kentucky women the right to have their own property before women got the right to vote in Kentucky.
Yeah. Well, I know I asked you this privately about your favorite suffragist book, and I wanted to tell you that my book club was at my house last night, and our next book is Mr. President that you had recommended to me. So I'm so excited that we're gonna read that for November. But Cindy Heine asked about books about Kentucky suffragists. Do you have any that you could recommend to us?
Well, yes, there's one that has just come out. It's brand new, and I think it's for sale. Dr. Melanie Gowan, who is a history professor at the University of Kentucky, she has just written a book about the history of Kentucky suffrage, which is excellent, and I highly recommend it, because Kentucky really has a rich history, suffrage history, much more so than most Kentucky southern states in particular. We were very progressive, and we had a lot of national conventions in Kentucky. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton came to Kentucky multiple times, and Susan B. Anthony was here a lot. And so all these leaders actually came to Louisville. And so, yeah, it's we have a lot to be proud of. And the whole point is about the League. When I joined the League, is that I realized, the League is the modern suffrage movement. It really is. The League is a continuation of women fighting for the, for the Equal Rights Amendment, for everything on improving schools, improving the environment. All these were, historically issues that the women wanted the right to vote, to work and have more influence on these issues that impacted their families and their communities.
Right. Someone just mentioned in the chat box about the other Melanie Goyne book about Mary Breckinridge,
right?
About the Frontier Nursing School, which is not directly suffrage, but still a wonderful woman that really worked for women.
Well, Madeline Breckinridge, I really think she was the strongest Kentucky suffrage leader. She was Henry Clay's great-great-granddaughter. And what's interesting, we finally got a marker up for her, but the people that run Ashland, the home of Henry Clay, at first they told me no. They have 17 acres, but they didn't have enough room for one marker for Madeline. So I said, a no is a delayed yes. And fortunately, there's a woman on their board named Kathy Clay, who's a descendant of Henry Clay. She got it on the property. So it's all about a no is a delayed yes. But we're also having two more markers that that have not been installed yet. One in Northern Kentucky for Eugenia Farmer, and she really worked on school suffrage for Kentucky before women got the right to vote. And also the Nugent sisters, who are African-American sisters from Louisville, and they had Ida B. Wells, and they were strong women, strong leaders in the Black suffrage movement. So and the other thing that we're doing that's so important with this National Votes for Women's Trail, we are really identifying a lot of ethnic groups, the Asian Americans, the Native Americans, the Latinos, and African American, and working class women and rural class. So these people that work for the right to vote were from all classes and all backgrounds. And that is really important, the diversity of the movement as well.
Right. Do we have some more questions for Marsha?
So I think Cindy made a comment. She said, I've been amazed at what women did without telephones, the internet, etc. Can you talk about the strategies they used?
Yeah.
Well, I'm amazed too. It's like, oh my goodness, just think that we maybe would have gotten the right to vote sooner if we had this technology. Well, they wrote letters. And of course, their strategies were, visiting legislators, testifying before committees, having presentations, speeches, public speeches. And even Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, they crossed this nation. They were in Yosemite National Park hiking in California. They really got around. I'm just amazed, but they had trains. So I think the trains really helped. And something else I learned about Louisville lately is the whole Ohio River. Because we were on the Ohio River and they would come from north to St. Louis, they would stop in Louisville. And I never really appreciated how we got so many famous people coming through Louisville because we're located on the river. But they wrote a lot of letters and traveled, even on horseback. One quick story I'll tell you about Elizabeth. One time she rode a horse to northern New York at a church to speak. And so the minister introduced us or something, he passed out or something. So anyway, she kept speaking. Well, the truth of the matter is, Elizabeth comes back out and she says, don't worry about it. He's in no pain. The minister's in no pain. The truth was he died. But by golly, she had ridden her horse up there. She's giving her speech. And so, okay, well, he died. Okay, but I'm here to give my speech. So got him dying later. So they were so gutsy, these women. Oh my goodness. Really interesting.
Yes, fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have some more questions? Well, Marsha, we thank you so much, and we thank Dot. We had wonderful speakers tonight, Dot Writings and Marsha Weinstein, for your time and your fascinating presentations. And thanks to everybody who joined us in tonight's program. I just wanted to remind everybody that today was the first day of in-person voting. And so for more information about your own county's election sites, you need to go to vote411.org. And your absentee ballots can still be mailed or dropped in the ballot collection boxes. And I want everybody to be sure to mark your calendars for our next virtual forum about the Mayor's Commission on Racial Justice and Equality, which occurs on November 17th from 7 to 8:30 p.m. And Lexington's Mayor Linda Gorton and Mr. Abdul Muhammad, local president of the NAACP, will speak about the soon-to-be-released report and action plans to improve racial justice and equality in our community. And to register, you need to go to LWVLexington.org and register under events. So thank you again, Dot and Marsha.
Mm-hmm.
It was so much fun, great information, and thanks everybody for being here.
Well, and I also want to give a plug for, we are doing a postcard party. So we're doing it every Monday night until Election Day. Probably the last night we'll just, maybe do some other outreach things. But we've got these beautiful postcards from National that are Vote 411. So, and we've been including lots of voting information on the back. Here in Lexington, the polls, early voting, again, like Mary said, started today. It's from 8:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. during Monday through Friday, and then from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. on Saturdays. In Lexington, there are 8 locations to vote, and you can find those at vote411.org. There's also 5 or 6 drop boxes where you can deposit your mail-in ballot. And again, I know we talk about this almost every opportunity, but remember to read the instructions when you're assembling your mail-in ballot. Your ballot, look at the back side, because there's actually constitutional amendments on the back side. So there's a lot of things to vote on. And then that ballot needs to go inside yellow envelope, seal it, and don't tear off the flap. Make sure you sign it and put it inside the white envelope, seal that, and also sign it as well. So, and you want to make sure that your mail-in ballots are turned in by Election Day. So that's November 3rd at 6 p.m. If you're getting it postmarked, then you need to make sure that you take it to the post office or deposit it in a post office box that has not had collection yet. So I recently learned that there may be new voters who've never mailed a letter, because we don't do that anymore. So anyway, so it's important to know how those deadlines work about getting postmarked. If you just turn in your ballot at a blue mailbox after 5 p.m., then it's not going to get postmarked and it's not going to get counted. So, but you always have the option of those ballot boxes. So anyway, if you want to participate in our postcard party, you can sign up again online at the events page, and then just drop us an email at lexingtonlwv@gmail.com, and we'll arrange getting postcards to you. Again, thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.